say to refute that and to say that that's wrong, right? To a degree. On the flip side, there are some really, really big negative net utility things that go on when you start these kind of policies in a non-directive way. So if you look back to Obama's policies, he deported way more people than Trump. Way more. He deported 3 million people across, I believe, his both terms. This is like way more than Trump will ever be able to deport based on his policies. And yet somehow when Obama did it, it didn't seem to the public as intense or as bad. Probably because the execution of the policy was more sensible and sort of more legitimate. He was deporting mostly people who were like actually convicted criminals. That somehow the broadness of the people who can be deported under Trump has increased, but the actual raw number of people being deported has not increased to the same amount that it was under Obama. So, and then as for the flip side of this argument in general about why this might not be a good thing, is because the economy now is really struggling. And most economists, including the actual newspaper or the editorial called The Economist, makes the argument that getting rid of all these illegal migrants is actually a really bad thing for the US economy. There are like millions of illegal migrants, mostly who work on farms and who do labor. And now that they're not doing that, like the US economy is struggling. Partly because Americans don't want to do this kind of labor, and partly because it's low paid labor. So if you bring in Americans, you have to pay them the real minimum wage, and that makes your company less profitable. Again, this can be argued on both sides too, because maybe we shouldn't be paying people below minimum wage in order to do really backbreaking labor. But maybe it's worth it for the overall economic gains and the fact that these people decided to come here under those conditions anyway. It's a tough question, but nonetheless, it has been a major theme, and I could say a lot more about it, but it's a major theme right now in the US. Okay, apart from that, on July 4th, Mr. Trump signs into law the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is quite a funny name. You can't deny that. And this has been the major funding bill that the Republicans have been working on. Some of the main things that it did are extend some tax cuts which were passed in Trump's first term. This means that the amount of money that the government actually raises is quite a lot lower. He also cut a lot of social spending. So social spending means education and healthcare. So the idea is that this will cause basically 10.9 million Americans to lose health insurance coverage. This actually caused some internal tension within the MAGA movement. That's Trump's main sort of political movement, Make America Great Again. That's what he had in his hat in the first campaign in the bottom left. And so it's going to, and it was going to harm, it is harming a lot of red states as well who rely on a certain amount of federal healthcare for poor people. So a lot of people are losing their healthcare as a result. And also, so you would think, right, if you decrease tax, but you also decrease social spending, maybe what you're going to do is balance the budget. That was a goal. Like people had talked about that. The government Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, was intending to balance the budget because we're running a really massive deficit, right? Like the government is spending a lot more than it's making. But in this case, that is not what's happened. So the expectation for this bill, because of the tax cuts and the fact that they're raising less revenue, means that the deficit is actually massively increasing. They're adding $2.8 trillion to the deficit. And you could like basically no government for a long time has been able to balance the budget, but Trump had talked a lot about it, and his supporters for a long time were talking a lot about it, and that sort of whole talking point has seemingly gone out the window. Okay, next, the Jeffrey Epstein case. So a little bit of background, and perhaps I have a question in the chat. Yeah, we got a Q&A. Okay, I'll get to this in just a second. Yeah, I'll get back to that at the end of this section. So Jeffrey Epstein, perhaps you know of him. He's a New York City born, I think Brooklyn, though I could be wrong, financier. Now, what exactly does that mean? I mean, he didn't pass his university degree. He became a teacher for a while. Then he got hired for an investment firm. Then he started his own investment firm. And basically everything after that is very hazy. It's pretty unclear how he became a mega wealthy individual and owning like multiple private jets, multiple private islands, rubbing shoulders, which means like being close to many, many incredibly powerful, rich people all around the world. Like, no one quite knows how that happened, which is a really interesting thing. Now, At some point in the early 2000s, someone finally came out and basically said, look, my daughter, my, I think, 13 or 14-year-old daughter, was paid a few $100s to get naked and to massage Jeffrey Epstein. And then more reports came out about this, and basically a flurry of reports came out that he was engaging in this sort of activity, and his previous girlfriend and then just friend Ghislaine Maxwell also was helping to find these girls and bring them to Jeffrey Epstein. So basically, he was like a serial pedophile, is the unfortunate truth of that. And so what happened, though, strangely, was that he was offered a plea deal. A plea deal is when someone can basically say, okay, I'm guilty of this thing, but not this other thing. And, and then we'll have a deal because it's easier when I plead guilty. And the deal was like incredibly favorable to him, given the amount of sort of horrible crime that he had seemingly committed. Basically, he had to commit to, or he admitted to having done 2 acts and was put on the sexual registry, so the sexual offender registry, and had to spend 18 months in prison. But during the day, he could go out. While he's in the prison, he's got his own private guard and a private wing of the prison. And when asked about this, the prosecutor at the time said something like, well, he's an asset, which means he's some sort of intelligence asset, as in maybe he's a spy. Like, lots of a lack of clarity here. And to top it all off, after he gets out of prison, and before that and after that, he is flying incredibly powerful people to his island, the Epstein Island, as it's been come to know, on the Lolita Express. Lolita being a book by Nabokov about a pedophile. Okay, so this plane is like labeled the Lolita Express because there's this idea in pop culture that on this island they had young girls who were performing sexual acts on the rich and famous and powerful people around the world. And the extent of the conspiracy theory says that Jeffrey Epstein had all of these people videotaped and recorded, and he had them in his pocket, blackmailed so he could do whatever he wanted and basically get away with anything. And that's how he became so rich. Now, the extent of the conspiracy, really, we don't know. This has been a massive political scandal, especially when Trump at the beginning was saying, well, he's going to release all the data, he's going to release all the files, everything's going to come open. And then at some point, he basically has Kash Patel, the head of his FBI, and some other people, give an interview where they're like, no, actually, don't worry about it. There's nothing to see here. There's no list of clientele. There's no great video. There's no useful information. Don't worry about it. So like, people obviously were incredibly mad, and this is causing some splinters within the MAGA movement as well. So they just on July 7th basically said, we're releasing no more data. Last Friday, they released some like thousands of pages, but by the end of the weekend, people said, look, this actually isn't new information. We've already had it. It's all public. They released a video of Epstein's jail cell, which is the place where he killed himself, or some people think was murdered or allowed to kill himself in jail, because this meant that he couldn't testify against these rich and powerful people, right? The video was released that was noticeably edited, and there's like minutes missing in the video. There's lots of strange stuff around this story, it has to be said. I think an all things considered judgment is probably that there is no great conspiracy, that lots of the people who, yes, went to the island, yes, interacted with Epstein, probably weren't engaged in underage prostitution. But Jeffrey Epstein certainly was, to a large degree, and was certainly doing a lot of it. That's like the long and the short of the story. Just recently, a bunch of people in the Trump administration, especially women, and also the actual the people who were offended against, so the victims, are coming out, and they gave a press conference, and they're trying to bring this issue back into the limelight. So we'll see whether this actually affects Trump's presidency. It's a little bit hard to say. He's weathered a lot of storms up to this point. We'll see if he can weather this one as well. Okay, so let's have a poll. Let's have our first poll. Let me answer Hardy's question, then we'll have a poll. Hardy says, let's see if I can answer this one. I've seen under Trump's administration that he seems to prioritize loyalty over political competence, with a T, and Newsom's disloyal acts make Trump take over a state's power to a federal level by force. Therefore, do you think America is becoming more autocratic or less democratic by replacing critical department heads with his own people? The answer to that, I think, is yes. I think you can't deny that Trump is replacing a lot of heads of these departments with people who are incredibly loyal to him. And if someone goes against him, he turns on them pretty immediately. Um, so, so like, yeah, and a lot of these people seem very incompetent. I mean, RFK Jr., the health secretary, we could have talked about that as well. Like, yeah, he's big into political loyalty, not big into competence. He doesn't seem that good at like effectively doing the things that he's talked about. Like, I mean, is there another slide here? Yeah, so there's actually a whole other slide on Trump that we need to get into. I basically agree with you. Is it becoming less democratic? I'm not a pessimist. I think the idea that we're like heading towards a full autocracy might be overblown, but that's my personal take. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit worried about it. I just moved to America, okay, like 2 days ago to get married on Sunday. So I obviously am not that afraid. Let's see. Okay. And stay tuned to our class in order to actually find out what the end result of Trump's presidency will be. Okay, let's move on. And we're going to have to speed up a little bit here, but let's go on to the university scandal. So I'm sure you remember Trump is cracking down on universities very significantly in lots of different ways. So Columbia University, under pressure from the Trump administration, agreed to pay $220 million and adopt quite a strict version of the definition of anti-Semitism. This is in response to the fact that they had a lot of things happen on their campus, which allowed protests about Israel and Palestine, which people considered anti-Semitic, some people. So this definition that we're talking about here is one by the Holocaust Memorial Agency, essentially, who say, in effect, that any criticism of Israel is also anti-Semitic. And this strict definition is pretty intense because there's a whole big kind of debate about what it means to be anti-Semitic. If I say that Israel shouldn't exist because it's immoral, is that an anti-Semitic claim or is it an anti-Israel claim? And on both sides, this kind of goes back and forth where some people want to associate criticism with Israel with anti-Semitism. Other people want to separate it. Exactly how connected they are is a complicated question. I don't think that they're totally disconnected, but it's a very complicated issue. Probably having this definition of anti-Semitism as like an official policy at a university is not a very sensible idea. It probably does have a restriction on free speech, if you ask me. Okay, moving on. August 2nd, we get a revision to the jobs data where it shows that the US economy created basically no new jobs in May, June, and July. Mr. Trump's response, and this I would say is an example of quite intense autocratic leaning ideas, which is that he basically said, you're fired. I don't believe you. I think you made those numbers up with no evidence. And there's no reason to think that this Bureau of Labor Statistics head would have done that. This has happened again now, basically. Like the latest numbers have just shown that, like I think they came out very recently. They've shown that the economy also has not grown. And so who knows what's going to happen now. He obviously wasn't able to get the numbers that he wanted. But the thought is that the immigration policies and the tariffs are significantly now starting to affect the US job market. It's also a worldwide effect, but who knows? The US might be at the center of that effect. Like Canada also lost a bunch of jobs. China's economy is now struggling. It could all come from the source of like Trump's intense tariffs and partly immigration policy. Okay. So we're also on August 11th now talking about the idea that the National Guard should be used for law enforcement purposes, so that they have been put into Washington, D.C., where if I'm defending the MAGA movement here, the murder rate has gone down, I believe, to 0 since they've been there. There was a 9-day period, certainly, where there were no murders in Washington, D.C., which is obviously a good thing. And the National Guard there, as far as I can tell, while this is a very contentious issue, and yeah, like the policing has been taken over by the National Guard, which is a huge thing. But if you see videos and you look on the ground, and like my fiance has just been to Washington, D.C., there is a sense in which like these National Guard are going around and picking up litter. They're taking photos with people. It's not quite as authoritarian and like black shirty as what was going on in 1939. That's my take on it, is that it doesn't seem like this is a Trump militaristic takeover of a city in the kind of worst possible way that could be thought about. But now he's talking about going into other cities, including Chicago, where there's a lot of gang violence. And this too is highly controversial. And they don't want it to happen. That is the mayor of Chicago, but we will see. Okay. August 26th, he pressures the Federal Reserve over the course of weeks to lower interest rates. A very quick primer on interest rates is that an interest rate is the price of borrowing money. So the Federal Reserve, basically this independent body, gets to set the interest rate. They don't do that by writing it on a piece of paper. They do it through a lot of complex mechanisms to do with how much money banks have to hold in their reserves overnight, among other things. Okay, so it's actually a very complicated thing. If you want to get into it, you can go look at that and figure out this interest rate question of how they manipulate it. Part of it is just forecasting. They just say, oh, we're going to raise the interest rate. And that basically has the effect of raising the interest rate, even without it really being implemented in any functional way. And what does this really mean? Essentially, if your economy is very slow and it starts slowing down, there's not enough employment, and you want to heat up your economy and get people to spend money, what you do is you allow banks to lend money to people to buy homes and buy businesses, start companies, and you lower the interest rate, which means that it's cheaper for us to borrow money. So if you make the interest rate 2%, that means if I borrow $100,000, I've only got to give back 2% of that. Great. So I'm going to borrow the money. I'm going to spend it. I'm going to start a company. I'm going to hire employees, and the economy is going to grow. Okay. And then if you think that the economy is too hot, as in really what that means is inflation is going up too much, the price of goods is too high, because the economy is like overheating, and there's too many jobs actually can be another problem. You want unemployment at a certain level. That means you can raise the interest rates, people stop borrowing money, and it cools down the economy. So this is a really central factor to heating up or cooling down the economy, is where your interest rates lie. Now, Trump has been pressuring the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates to boost the economy. Now, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency that should not be politically affected. Because if you think that it's going to be politically affected, what people will worry about is that it's not going to actually make good decisions. It will make political decisions, ones that are good for politicians, not for the actual goal of managing inflation and unemployment, which is the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve. So now Trump pressuring, and eventually fires one of the 7 governors on the Federal Reserve Board. This is huge, right? And she is now countersuing, saying he had no right to do that. So this political, political intervention on the Federal Reserve's policymaking is really, really dangerous for the functioning of the American. Okay, it's a risk. Okay, I think fine. So can you guys still hear me? Let me know. Yeah, I think it's still good. Okay. Finally, an appeals court has once again found that the tariffs that he's implemented are illegal. We seem to be going back and forth on this. The tariffs remain in place until the Supreme Court gets their hand on it. We don't know what's happening with the tariffs, but they are generally higher. They are in effect, and they are making prices go up, inflation go up, and probably harming jobs. Let's have a poll. Here is the question. I would like you guys to answer this poll as best you can there should be a section for this. So I'm going to release the first poll question, US politics. There you go. I'm excited to see your responses. So I'll give you 45 seconds to tell me which of these 3 topics do you think has the biggest influence on the American political system. Oh, we got our votes coming in. I don't want to tell you what they are. I don't know if you guys can see them right now. And I'm sure if you're on YouTube, you can't participate, but that's okay. Okay. We've got 100% of responses. Here we go. Let's reveal it. End poll. Can you guys see this now? Share results. Let's have a look. This is the first time I've done this. So you guys can see the poll results now, I believe. So 50% of you precisely believe that the immigration raids are more important. 50% think the big, beautiful bill. And no one thinks that the Epstein fallout is the biggest thing. very interesting, very reasonable. I think that's a reasonable division. Okay. Awesome. Oh, I realize I think maybe not 100% of people got in there, but let's try for the next one. See if you can get involved and answer my poll. All right, let's go on to the next topic. Let's talk about the Ukraine war. So, over the summer in July, Trump has gone back and forth in terms of his valence on this, but he's basically come out and said after a NATO meeting, he came out with his strongest words of displeasure against Putin, for his continuation of the war and his strikes on civilians, which continues, obviously. The US then scales up its weapons transfers to Ukraine and issues this sort of 50-day deadline for Russia to end the war or face incredible secondary sanctions, which means basically sanctions on countries that are dealing with Russia, which should have a flow-on effect of harming Russia's economy doubly because those countries will be incentivized not to trade with Russia itself. Okay. Then, July 28th, Mr. Trump growing really frustrated with the fact that Putin is basically ignoring him and having a completely dismissive attitude to Trump's attempt at twisting his arm and rejection of these deadlines and just continued escalation of violence. He claims to shorten the deadline and say, well, it's only 10 to 12 days from today. On August 6th, he singles out India specifically for contributing to Russia's economy by buying their oil, which is like one of the major Russian exports, and announces an additional 25% tariff on India. This is huge, right? That results in a 50% tariff from India, which really India has been a geopolitical ally of the United States for the past 2 decades. And one of the key themes that we'll see, although this puts that into question, but one of the key themes that we see is the geopolitical balancing between the great powers. So really the 2 great powers right now are China and the US. They're the ones with the serious economies, with the serious militaries, globally significant. Of course, any country with nuclear weapons is by its very nature like significant. But in terms of like overall geopolitical strategy, you can think of China and the US as being the great powers. And then where allegiances fall between them is a critical thing that goes on. So India, for the longest time, has been a real enemy of China and has disliked China significantly. There have been clashes on the border that I'm sure we've talked about in the past. These clashes on the border between India and China as well. What a strange thing. They're not allowed weapons. So both sides recognize we need to patrol our borders, but we can't have people shooting each other. We can't start an actual war between China and India. So what we should have instead is they should be allowed to carry sticks and clubs and like maybe even sticks with like nails sticking out of them, like pretty violent stuff. And then when they meet in these border regions, in the mountains mostly, they start clubbing each other and having these like old school, old time, throwing rocks, smashing each other with bats kind of battles over border regions. It's just insane. Okay. So anyway, all that to say that India, as an enemy of China for the longest time, has therefore fallen on the side basically of the US as a balancer in that region. A little side note, I actually lived in northern India for a little period in 2023, and it was on the road to China, basically. Like this is where if you went from Delhi, the capital of India, up to China, you would go through this little village I was living in. So the road that I was living on was really, really well maintained. And when there was a flood that destroyed the road, because maybe it wasn't like built that well, but this massive flood destroyed the road. And within about 6 days, it was rebuilt in a massive effort because they know that if they have to get their troops up to the border regions, they can. Okay, so an interesting little personal example there. But this balancing is now put into question by this 50% tariff. And Putin, Xi Jinping, and Modi, they just had this meeting where they were like literally hand in hand and having great conversations with one another and like having a really, really close relationship, demonstrating that like in a really interesting way. And politics plays out at these meetings in a really, really radical way, because what kind of photos are taken, what kind of opportunities, how they stand near each other, what they're doing with their hands, how they talk to each other in front of the media, all these little things give clues about the nature of the relationship that can actually be even more significant than the content of the conversation. So that's something to look out for, and as a general theme of like political discourse and political reporting that we're going to keep our eyes on. Okay. So next, on August 15th, Mr. Trump meets with Putin in Alaska. Alaska being, it actually, like, I think at a certain time of year, or maybe just in general, there's actually a land bridge between Alaska and Russia, or maybe it's a Russian island, but like they are incredibly close to one another, okay? And this was the ending of the diplomatic isolation enforced by the West since the start of the Ukraine war. Diplomatic isolation meaning that Putin wasn't able to visit any of these Western countries that were supporting Ukraine. And in a joint press conference that happened after this event, Mr. Trump expresses this great optimism that things will be coming to a conclusion. He was dead wrong. In this meeting, which was widely talked about at the time, Trump allowed Putin, or invited Putin, to get into his car and drive with him to the next location. This is one of those things that was talked about really widely as like having sort of symbolic importance. Then on August 18th at the White House, Mr. Trump meets Ukrainian President Zelensky. And I don't know if you remember, but earlier Zelensky came to the White House and had a terrible meeting with Trump and his vice president, JD Vance, where they yelled at him and embarrassed him and criticized him for not wearing a suit. And it was just a terrible experience. So as a show of unity, a bunch of European leaders like Macron, the new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and Finnish President Alexander Stubb, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, they all came with Zelensky to this meeting. And that was significant as well. But the truth is, none of this has had a great effect. Not much has changed. Putin is still attacking Ukraine. The one maybe significant change that's worth talking about, or just something that is happening on the battlefield, like really recently, is that there have been quite successful attacks from a new sort of round of Ukrainian drones. There are these $55,000 drones, which on the scale of drones is very expensive, that can fly quite deep into Russia and quite accurately target in a kamikaze strike, meaning it destroys itself in the process, oil fields. So it's been attacking oil fields and oil production facilities across Russia, which is having an effect on oil production in Russia. And they've been ramping this up. And so this could have an effect. Putin recently has said he's willing to meet with Zelensky, but yet again, like, you can't take that too seriously. He's willing to say that just to make it look like he's sort of on the side of peace. But as to whether that will actually be the case is yet to be seen, and is pretty unlikely in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so Ukraine war continues, no end in sight, not looking very good. The same games are afoot, but with some interesting geopolitical moments over the summer. Okay, let's ask another poll. I want to see if I can get all the people in this Zoom room to respond to the poll. Let's open it up. War in Ukraine. What will influence the war's next phase? US policy positions, Russia's relationship with China, or Ukraine's ability to sustain military support? These, I suppose, are related and interrelated, but I'm interested to see your perspective here. Another 30 seconds. Let's get those responses in. If you're on YouTube, perhaps you can comment and you can have a conversation with each other in the comment stream of the YouTube channel. Got a decent number, but I'd like to see more. Okay, we have an interesting split. Let's end the poll, share results, and feel free as well to ask questions in the chat. I'm more than happy to respond to questions in chat or in the Q&A. So here's the response. So 3 out of 11 think that the US policy positions are the most important. 5 out of 11 think that Russia's relationship with China is the most important. Interesting. I didn't even talk about that, but very interesting. Of course, China operates on a policy of non-interference when it comes to these kind of conflicts. They basically don't get involved. North Korea has been sending quite a lot of people into the war. Like thousands have died. They actually had a for the first time in a long time, they sort of admitted to a lot of the deaths that occurred, and they had in North Korea they had the dead rolled out and sort of given military a parade essentially to respect the dead. So that was an interesting development. But China doesn't like have a specific strong stance on this and just stays out. So it's interesting that you guys think that that is a central component to this. I'm sure it's relevant, but I would have said that US policy positions might be more significant because they're the ones who are like actually providing lots of arms and involving themselves, and the sort of things that Trump is capable of doing seem to me a lot greater and more varied and like have a potential greater impact. And then Ukraine's ability to sustain military support. Yeah, look, that's obviously essential to their capacity to continue the war. And if they lost all military support, I think that they would be overrun. 3 out of 11 people thought that that was the most important. It's interesting to see that China got the most, is considered the most important by you guys in this case. Very interesting indeed. Okay. Perhaps there should be more of a China focus for the rest of the semester. Is that what you guys are looking for? Maybe we'll take that into account. Okay, let's get on to our third topic, and I'd love to see a Q&A in the chat after this one. Let's talk about what I'm willing to call the terrible scenario in the Middle East. Briefest overview, you know that on October 7th, well, you know that in 1949, Israel was created as an act of the British, and then immediately afterwards, a war ensued where the Arab nations around it attacked. I'm sure you know that the Nakba occurred at this point, where Israelis drove a lot of Palestinians from their homes and occupied the Golan Heights and Gaza and the West Bank. And that after that, things have been highly tense and highly controversial like ever since, up to the point where Gaza was given its independence in 2000 and elected Hamas, a pretty intense Islamist organization who stood on the complete destruction of Israel and the murder of all Jews, and took control of the region. Didn't have another election, of course. And on October 7th, 2023, they invaded Israel with a pretty massive campaign of slaughter. They recorded a lot of it, and they basically tried to kill as many Jews as they can and try to start a new global intifada where essentially everyone was pushing back on Israel and all the Arab states would rise and destroy them. This did not work. Okay, they did kill many thousands. Was it 1,300 Israeli citizens, including women and children, in pretty horrific circumstances. Israel then responds by a massive bombing campaign and eventually actually sends in ground troops. And basically that has continued ever since. Hamas took many hostages. They still have hostages. And that has just continued ever since. Now, the latest stuff that's happened over the summer, Iran got much more significantly involved when Israel basically decides to launch a surprise attack on Iran's key military and nuclear facilities. So I'm sure you know this, but Iran has been developing its nuclear technology, enriching a lot of uranium with the attempt, it is believed, to get access to a nuclear weapon. Because once you have access to a nuclear weapon, you become sort of untouchable as a state because you always have the capacity to engage what's called mutually assured destruction, where you could potentially do a nuclear bomb, drop a nuclear bomb on your enemy, and that would like destroy an entire city. It could basically. So that creates mutually assured destruction, which means that you can't really invade those countries. That is part of the reason why North Korea continues to exist as it does. So, in order to prevent that happening, Israel decides now is the time they are going to take out a huge number of their like nuclear facilities and also importantly their air defense systems. So they knock out their air defense systems in a first round of attacks, then they kill a whole bunch of top Iranian military and political leaders, their nuclear scientists, like within a couple of hours in an incredibly precise set of strikes. This kickstarts a 12-day long war. Israel's carrying out airstrikes. Iran responds with all of these drones and missile attacks. Israel's like lit up their Iron Dome, which shoots missiles out of the sky, had some positive effect, but lots of missiles did also get through. I don't think there were huge casualties in Israel, but nonetheless, it was significant. Then the US finally actually gets involved. And this is radical. They use their B-2 stealth bombers, which possibly are the coolest looking military planes that I've ever seen. They are like fly ultra high, and they have the capacity to drop what's called bunker buster bombs. It's a great name, but basically what it means is if you have a facility that's deep underground, these bunker busters can dig through the earth when they hit the ground at like supersonic speeds, dig way deep, hundreds of feet deep, and then explode in deep, deep, deep in the earth. And the idea was that this would finally destroy the key nuclear facilities, which were buried deep underground in Iran. So the question of whether this was effective is open. The latest I read about this is that it probably delayed nuclear capacity in Iran by about 2 years. It certainly didn't destroy the entire facility and totally get rid of everything, but it definitely set them back. They're going to have to rebuild a lot of this stuff. It's unclear how big the effect actually was, but I think it does reveal Iran's like incapacity to respond to airstrikes from both Israel and the US, which does change the sort of geopolitical strategy around this in the sense that there doesn't need to be as much fear about Iran's capacity to react to these kind of things in the future, perhaps. Okay, what does Iran do? They do this sort of thing that they often do, which is a demonstration response, something that's sort of like not really intended to kill anyone, but just to say, like, we're not taking this lying down. So what they said was, we're going to attack an American base in Qatar, but they give them plenty of time. They tell them they're going to do it. They broadcast it. They fire some slow missiles. The slow missiles are shot out of the sky and nothing happens. Okay. So that is more or less what happened in this conflict. Apart from that, the destruction in Gaza has really, really continued in a pretty terrible way. Like, there's the thought that a lot of famine has gone on there. Just last week, there was sort of a strike on a hospital. I just watched these videos, a strike on a hospital where they thought that a camera was set up to basically look at the area and track Israeli troops' movements in order to make Hamas's attacks easier. They blow that up. They kill a few people. Then, like 9 minutes later, when a bunch of first responders have rushed up and are like looking after the people who've been struck, another 2 missiles come in and strike the same balcony. Now, Israel has admitted this was a mistake, but it's the kind of thing that has happened quite a lot. It's unclear whether this is like deliberate or an accident, and it's just it's not good. Let's put it that way. A lot of people have died in this conflict who are not militants. So it's hard to say, but it's hard to say like what the fundamental underlying ethical kind of conclusion should be, but I will be happy to say that it's not a good thing, a lot of this. But the geopolitical response has been interesting. So France has announced to recognize Palestine as a state. So recognition, I mean, what does that really mean? It would give a lot of legal leverage to Palestine. It's unclear, and it would give them unique obligations and change certain things. It's more than anything a demonstration of their resolve and their sort of criticism of Israel more than anything else. So France was planning to do that because of the famine claims, because of the whistleblowers saying, accusing the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is basically this group of US and Israel origins, which has taken over the distribution of aid in the region and has shot at a bunch of Gazans trying to get aid. And then, so that has been really criticized, this attempted distribution of aid, to the point where they had to like airdrop a bunch of aid into Gaza because they were running out and famine was taking over. And then Britain and Canada, who are really like supporters of Israel to a large degree, they step in as well and say that they also plan to recognize Palestine as a state, which again is a huge thing. I think Some of these places have said, like, the only way we'd recognize them as a state is if they get rid of Hamas, which won't happen and doesn't seem to be working. And like Hamas just seems to be holding out, even if it's been highly weakened. They still have hostages. It just doesn't seem like they actually can achieve their goal of getting rid of Hamas. People will say that's partly because Hamas is an ideology, right? It's the idea that Israel shouldn't exist. You can't really kill an idea. You can kill militants, but you can get more militants. And if you kill someone's brother in an attempt to get rid of this sort of like militant idea, their brother is likely to become a militant. So you've created one as you've killed one. It's a vicious cycle. It's unclear how this is going to work. It's unclear what the end state is. Is the intention now for Israel to just take over all of Gaza? Maybe. We can hope not. July 28th, two prominent Israeli groups basically say B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights both accuse Israel of genocide in Gaza, which is significant. And then on July 31st, in another indication of a shift in public opinion, prominent MAGA Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a very funny character, becomes the first Republican to call Israel's actions a true genocide, following a really increased week of intense criticism of Israel from some significant MAGA-affiliated influencers like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Okay, on August 22, famine is declared for the first time in Gaza. Global outrage continues, and domestic Israeli sentiment, so the feeling of people within Israel, also shifts in the direction of feeling that the war maybe has gone on long enough, maybe that a deal should be struck, that they should be trying to get back the hostages, and some version of the status quo should be returned to. Unfortunately, the status quo is where Gaza is still run by a very intense militaristic terrorist organization who wants to destroy Israel. So as with many times throughout history, although this has probably been the most intense, I think, interaction between Gaza and Israel. But as history has shown us, Gaza does some attack on Israel. Israel responds with massive force, and then some version of the status quo is retained, and the people in Gaza continue to fight, and then it happens again. And I hate to say it, that seems to be the trend of what's happening here. The cyclicality of war in this region rages on, sad to say. Okay, let's have another poll. My favorite possible thing. Here we go. So let's have the Middle East poll launched now. I'm going to give you a minute. Who should take greatest responsibility for addressing humanitarian crisis like Gaza? Regional governments, so that's like Hamas and Israel, international organizations like the UN or NGOs, non-government organizations, or global powers like the US, EU, China, and Russia. Where should the response come from on the question of the Middle East and Gaza? Okay, 30 seconds left. Come on, guys, all get in there. Everyone get in there. A couple more people. There's more people to get in. Come on. You can do it. I believe in you. Okay, let's have a look. No more votes coming in, so let's end the poll. We have another mixed result. Let's have a look. No one can agree. And I guess it's because these questions are incredibly complicated, but the divide is interesting. So 3 out of 11 say regional governments like Hamas itself and like Israel should take control. Who's got greatest responsibility? I guess the phrase greatest responsibility is vague, so it's hard to answer. But then international organizations gets 4, global powers gets 4. Interesting. Okay, let's move on to our final topic. I believe, yeah, one more topic, which is artificial intelligence. We like to keep track of artificial intelligence because it is one of the great underlying technological innovations of our time. we'll see the extent to which it affects our economy. It already is having an effect. There's already a claim that like many companies are basically not employing as many beginner workers as a result of this. So let's have a look. July 15th, after months of lobbying behind the scenes, a public push by Jensen Huang, which is the NVIDIA founder or CEO. And NVIDIA is the chip manufacturer in the US who produces all the major chips and the best quality chips. They basically allow or become allowed to secure the ability to export back to China, which had been restricted before. This reverses Biden's export bans to China, which was an attempt to slow down China's capacity to get hold of AI. Whether that worked is sort of debatable. They have a lot of AI capacity now using things like DeepSeek, which functionally does a very good job. July 23rd, Trump signs the executive order preventing woke AI in the federal government and targeting ideological biases and social agendas as basically these concerns rage on. So there's a big question, and it's happened since the start. You know, you understand that there's this like culture wars concept, that right and left is not so much of an economic thing anymore. It's like barely even about main political issues. Right and left seems largely now to be about wokeness, which as it's on its own is like a strange topic in conversation. It covers a broad range of things, but yeah, we don't have time to like get into it right now. But basically, Trump says we don't want any woke AI, any AI that talks about race too much, like the importance of race, of making sure people are protected based on their race, or, you know, homosexuals, gays, like lesbian, transgender people. Any talk about any of this kind of social stuff is like dangerous. We don't want it in our government. And any AI that has that, we should get rid of, or we should clamp down on. Now, this is in the context of the fact that AI companies can influence the way their AI deals with social issues. And we know that because Grok, which is Twitter's AI, or you could call it Elon Musk's AI, had this thing over the summer where for a period, depending on how Musk was tweaking it, it would come out with some crazy stuff. Like when the South African refugee issue was significant, like the idea that white South Africans needed to be protected from a genocide, from basically having their farms taken over and being killed en masse, which was a bit debatable as it was. But when that was happening, Grok was sort of constantly bringing it up, even in conversations that were totally irrelevant, meaning probably Elon Musk had like personally gone in and said to Grok, like, I want you to behave in this way. So this concept of AI being a political tool used by people to influence cultural discourse is very significant. And because these are being used all the time, if you have political biases inherent in these platforms, it could have a social effect, which is like a deeply relevant ethical question that you guys need to consider, even when you're using AI yourselves, which I hope is not for schoolwork. Okay, on August 7th, in a big change to my life, they released OpenAI releases GPT-5. This is the newest update. Claims that it's analogous to having a PhD level expert in any topic. And I think the factual, like actual statistical stuff suggests that it is better at math. It's better at a lot of things. I think its functionality is slightly improved since GPT-4. One of the biggest personal uses I've seen is that on a website that I run, I've been able to finally integrate code. I don't know the first thing about coding, but I was able to create an application, relatively simple, but like with sort of like 8 or 10 different steps on it, with multiple components, a timer for a debate competition. I was able to create that using just natural language prompts on GPT-5 and then copy pasting the code into a Wix editor. And that to me was a huge shift, because now the coding can be done by anyone, like maybe not super complex stuff, but it took me 10 revisions of saying, no, I want this change. No, I want this change. And finally, I had a product that I was happy with. That's quite a radical change. And you guys could look into using that as well on your own. I think it's significant. Finally, Intel, the struggling chip manufacturer and technology firm otherwise, basically agrees to sell 10% of its stake to the US government, which boosts its stock prices, drawing some criticism from conservatives saying, why are we doing this? But they want to protect Intel because it's a US company, I believe. So they take over part of it to try to keep it afloat. Okay, we're coming up to the end now. This is the last poll. I'm only going to give you a very short period to respond to this poll because I want to have a little bit of time right at the end. How do I launch this one? I stop sharing this one. I launch this one. Go ahead. Answer. What aspect of AI will have the biggest effect on your future? Jobs in the economy, education and learning, politics and misinformation, everyday life, like healthcare and social media. Education and learning in the lead. Let's get your responses, guys. Where do you think AI is going to have the biggest influence? Okay, we're getting more in now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, ending the poll. So we've got jobs in the economy as the #1 response this time. I think that's very reasonable. Jobs in the economy, 7 out of 11. Education and learning, 6 out of 11. Also very reasonable. It's obviously having an effect. I can't imagine what it's like to be at school right now or to be a teacher. I want to know from you guys, tell me in the chat, have they figured out a way in education to actually test you and not just allow you to use AI? Like, have schools radically changed their policies about homework and about submission of essays and group assignments? Like, do you guys functionally feel like you're actually prevented from using AI? I want to know how many people, like, you can say, how many people do you think at your school probably use AI on a daily basis to help them with work? I'd be really interested to hear that. Politics and misinformation, 3 out of 11. I think it's significant too. And everyday life, 2 out of 11. Very interesting results, guys. Super, super interesting. Okay. I want to tell you about one further thing, or actually 2 further things, which are some competitions that will allow you to, oh gosh, here are some major areas of, sorry, I got the wrong order. So here are some major areas that we're going to cover throughout the semester. And we don't have a poll for this actually, but I'm interested to hear this. I'm interested to hear your feedback on this in the chat, wherever, in the Q&A, or you can email it in to the email associated with WeUp. But we're going to cover all of this stuff depending on the week, but I want to know what you guys think about these topics. Okay. I don't actually think that this is... Oh, I see. It was at the end of this as well. So there was a second poll under this, and I got a bunch of responses. Thanks, guys. I see it now. My mistake. So here we have the responses from people about what they want to cover. So geopolitics and conflicts is a big one. Global economy. Oh, technology and science breakthroughs. You guys are super interested in that. Okay, happy to cover more of that. And then a pretty wide split beyond that. That's awesome. Thank you for the feedback. We'll take that very seriously. We'll save it. I'm glad we've got your feedback on that. Okay, finally, if you want to engage in sort of ethics and philosophy competitions that discuss this kind of stuff and get into these details, specifically if you want to go on technology and ethics, you join the TKE competitions. These are philosophy competitions with really high level judges who have philosophy degrees, and you get to like have these incredible conversations about AI ethics. The next case set's really cool. Got stuff about colonization on Mars and medical technology, and of course AI in school again. That's incredibly essential. And there's just so much to say about all of this. So if you want to join a competition like that, scan the QR code or go to tkethics.org and you can find all about that. There are multiple types of ethics competitions that you can join. And finally, if you're more into debating and essay writing or public speaking, this Global AI Debates is the competition for you. We've recently secured our first judge for the finals round. He is an incredibly interesting guy with, he works at the high level in Microsoft and does integration of AI in various companies. We're going to be publicizing all about him in a minute. But this on the bottom right, you can scan that for the invitation to the Global AI Debates. And it's got different age categories. The topics are here. Are AI-enabled toys good for kids? Should the government deploy AI instructors as a free educational resource? And this actual third topic has changed. It's basically about AI personal relationships now. My apologies. So if you want to be a part of either of those competitions, please go to the website and have a look. We'd love to see you there. The topics we cover in this class will definitely mirror some of the stuff that comes up in those tournaments. Next week, everybody, we will be covering Beijing in the United States. We'll talk about the federal courts in the US, and we'll talk about France's government and its impending debt problems. Are we leading to a collapse? Thank you all.